Hello, I'm Ed Brodo. Most people I meet hate to negotiate. They tell me they'd rather go to the dentist. It's because they don't understand the basic principles of negotiating. Well, today I've synthesized everything I know into 6 main principles. If you follow them, you will be a great negotiator. And one more thing. I'm not a professor. I come out of the real world, the corporate world. What you're going to learn here is practical information that you can use in business and in your life. A couple of years ago, a man walks into a sandwich shop in Delray Beach, Florida, and orders a meatball sandwich. So the owner starts to fix the meatball sandwich when all of a sudden the customer pulls out a gun and he says, "This is a stick-up, give me all the cash in the register." Now, let me tell you what happened. The owner of the shop puts down the meatball sandwich, looks at the gunman and says, "Listen, pal, we've had a really bad month." He says, "Business has been terrible. Would you do me a favor? Will you settle for $10 in the meatball sandwich?" Now, again, I'm not making this up. It was in the paper. He says, would you settle for $10 in the meatball sandwich? So the gunman says, "Are you out of your mind?" He says, "I got a gun here." He says, "I'm not settling for $10 in the meatball sandwich." He says, "I'm not settling for anything less than $20 in the meatball sandwich." So the owner says, "You got a deal." He gives him the $20. He gives him the meatball sandwich. And you know what it said in the newspaper? It said, "And the robber left satisfied." The point of the story, the reason I love to start off with this story is it takes courage. In our culture, it takes courage to negotiate. And my feeling is that if this fellow could negotiate a robbery, think of what the possibilities are for the rest of us. But people tend to dislike negotiating. Most of the people I meet tell me that they would rather go to the dentist than negotiate. And I believe the reason is because they don't understand the basic principles. So today, we're going to cover 6 basic principles of negotiation. And when you leave here, I promise you, you're going to look at the whole subject differently, and it could have a life-changing effect. Now, the first thing that I think we ought to do, before we do anything else, is define what we mean by negotiation. Negotiation is the process of overcoming obstacles in order to reach agreement. Now, what are the obstacles? The obstacles are your position and my position. Now, very important to understand that when I talk about people's positions, there's a difference between your position and what you really need to get in the negotiation. When you're negotiating with me, I may say I want the world, but what do I really need? That's the real issue. Negotiators do 2 things that most people don't do. They are assertive and they challenge everything. That's what I call negotiation consciousness. Your ability to be assertive and challenge everything. Now, I distilled everything that I know down to 6 principles. As we explain each one of these issues, you're going to find the nuances are where the benefit is. Now, what do I mean by aiming high? Well, most people, I find, go into a negotiation with a kind of self-defeating attitude. They don't expect to do well. Somehow they expect to be taken advantage of. Well, negotiators don't operate like that. Negotiators expect to succeed. They are optimists. They expect that they're going to do well in a negotiation. And one of the ways that you can guarantee that you'll do well is by opening high. Now, what do I mean by opening high? If you're on the buying side, you want to offer less than you're willing to pay. If you're on the selling side, you ask for more than you're willing to accept. Open high. I'll give you a kind of a weird example of this. When I was in boot camp in the Marine Corps, we had this wonderful day where they put about 70 pounds of equipment on us, a hard helmet, a backpack, 2 full canteens with water, a rifle. They made us crawl on our bellies for about 100 yards under barbed wire, and then all of a sudden we had to stand up, and there was a 6-foot ditch. So you had to jump with all this paraphernalia on you. You had to jump over the ditch. Well, I was great at climbing, crawling around on my belly. When it came to the ditch, I kept jumping and falling in the ditch. And of course, the sergeants were all over me and, screaming at me and hurling obscenities at me. One day, one of my friends said to me, Ed, you know what you're doing? He said, you're aiming at the ditch. You're focusing on the ditch. He said, what you got to do is you got to focus beyond the ditch, aim beyond the ditch. So the next time we did this exercise, I crawled on my belly through the 100 yards. I got up, and instead of aiming my focus at the ditch, I looked at a point way out there. And I ran, and I took off, and imagine me now, I'm flying through the air, and I cleared the ditch. Well, it was an amazing life lesson, because I've applied that lesson to so many different things. I find that if I aim high and I expect a lot, that it usually works out that way. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, to help you further, we got to start talking a little bit here about setting targets. There are 3 targets that you need to know before you go into your next negotiation. Here are the 3 targets. First of all, your maximum. Second, what you're hoping to get. And third, your bottom line. Once you know those 3 objectives or targets, nobody can manipulate you and force you to accept something that's not going to be in your best interest. Because you know, if it goes below the bottom line, you're just going to walk away. I suggest to all my negotiators, think of yourself as a detective. And what do detectives do? They gather facts, they gather information. You've got to ask questions about the other side in the negotiation. And in fact, I have what I call the other strategy, the strategy of the other, which means instead of focusing on you and all of your problems and everything, focus on the other negotiator. Focus on the other negotiator. Let me tell you a story. I had an uncle, my Uncle Willie, lived to be 95 years old. He lived in upstate New York, very rural area. Shortly before he died, he used to take a walk every day. He's taking a walk in the woods. He was about 93 years old. And he's walking in the woods. He comes upon a frog. And the frog looks up at Uncle Willie and says, hey, old man, if you give me a kiss, I'll turn into a beautiful princess. Interesting offer, right? So Uncle Willie doesn't say a word. He picks the frog up, sticks the frog in his pocket, keeps on walking. So he's walking down the road. About a mile later, frog sticks its little head out of Uncle Willie's pocket and says, hey, old man, what about that kiss? Remember, I'll turn into a beautiful princess. And Uncle Willie says, I've been thinking about that, and frankly, at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog. Well, he said it was a true story. I don't know. Point of the story is that we need to look at a negotiation not from our point of view, but from the other person's point of view. So while for us it might be a beautiful princess, for the other negotiator it might be a talking frog. Always look at it from the other person's point of view. Now at this point, I'm going to tell you something that I think may be the most important thing I'm going to say all day, and that is the one question that you must all ask when you go into a negotiation, the most important question. And that is, what's the pressure on the other side in this negotiation? We tend to focus on our pressure. Oh, I can't, I have no power in this. I'm desperate to make a deal. They have all the power. Forget that. Just forget it. Say to yourself, what's the pressure on the other side in the negotiation? Why do they have to make the deal? Not why do I have to make the deal? Why do they have to make the deal? That's the key. And as you're doing that, you're gonna start thinking about the other side, and you're gonna say to yourself, how is the other side looking at this negotiation? What's their point of view? There's a lot written about how to deal with difficult people. Have you seen these books, how to do? To me, it's very, very simple. The only really difficult person that you have to deal with is guess who? You. You have to change your behavior. You have to stop treating the other person as though they are the enemy and start treating them like a partner. So in order to do that, you have to say to yourself, where are they coming from? What's their motivation? What's going to satisfy them in this situation? And that's what I mean by the other strategy. So I'm going to give you Ed's two-step listening course. Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Ed's two-step listening course. First one is what I call the 70-30 rule. The 70-30 rule. Can you guess what that is? 70-30 rule says listen 70% of the time, talk only 30% of the time. Listen 70%, talk 30%. Now, I'm not a mathematician. I don't expect you to follow this exactly. What I'm really saying is let the other person do most of the talking. Let them do most of it. Now, that's hard because most people want to talk. We want to talk. We want to say. We have things that we have to say. You've got to train yourself to keep your mouth shut. It's as simple as that. Now, there's a problem that some of you may have noticed already with this first step. What if you're dealing with somebody and they don't want to talk? And they shut. I've dealt with people like that. I'm sure you have too. They just sit there and stare at you. There's a way to get around that, and that's the second step in my listening course. Ask open-ended questions. You've heard of that before, an open-ended question? Open-ended question is a question that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. So if I were to say to you, are you enjoying my presentation so far? You're going to say yes or no. What I want to ask you is, what have you learned so far that will help you in your job? That would be an open-ended question. Because what am I doing now? I'm forcing you to give me a long answer. And that's what you want to do. So the open-ended question forces the other person to give you a long-winded answer. You want them to start talking. Because once they start talking, they're going to tell you all their problems. They're going to tell you why they need to make the negotiation. They're going to tell you what their weaknesses are. They're going to answer the question, what's the pressure on the other side? But you got to get them talking. If you're patient, you are going to drive the other side crazy, especially if they're in a hurry, especially if they are under pressure in a negotiation. That's why you always must give yourself time to negotiate. If you're handed a project by your boss, be sure you have enough time to do it. Always give yourself time. When you go in to buy a car and they're talking to you about your dog and your family and everything, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to try to put the pressure on you to make a deal right away. I have a friend who is a great negotiator. He spends 5, 6, 7 hours negotiating it when he buys a car. Then he walks out, comes back a few days later and does the same thing. Eventually he just wears them down. Very, very hard for us. Very easy for a child from the Middle East or a child in Japan. I mean, their whole concept, I've done business with the Japanese. And when you try to push them, you try to rush them, they kind of like go tilt. They just can't deal with that. They're not used to dealing with it. They won't deal with it. And if you ask them to hurry up, they're just going to, no, sorry, no. They won't say no, they'll just laugh. Well, laughing, the Japanese have a lot of different ways of saying no without saying no. And I admire them. They're very, very good negotiators, especially when they're dealing with Americans, because they know Americans are in a hurry. One of my clients went to Japan to negotiate a deal. He thought it was going to take about 3 days. It took 3 months. It took 3 months. They just, because they know that Americans will give in right away if when pushed. So if you can learn that lesson to be patient, it will put you ahead of 98% of everybody else in the population. Be patient, be patient. I see so many people in negotiations giving stuff away without getting anything back. What is it, when you give me something and you don't ask for something in return, what do you do to my expectation level? You're raising my expectations. I'm going to start asking you for more and more and more. What happens if you say, wait a minute, you're asking me, Ed, you're asking me for a concession. We'll give you this concession if you give us that other concession. What does that do to me? That says to me, wait, I better watch it here. I better be very, very careful because I don't want to give up too much. So maybe I better not ask for that because I don't want to give away what they're asking for. So it's always, if we do this for you, will you do that for us? If we do this for you, will you do that for us? Whenever you give something away, get something in return. Always be willing to walk away from a negotiation. Always be willing to walk away from a negotiation. Another way of putting it is never negotiate unless you have options. Never negotiate without options. This is something that I learned when I was working for, I believe it was Litton Industries. We were selling this telecomputer type system, very sophisticated system, and I was a sales manager. My sales rep comes into my office. He says, I've got a prospective buyer. The buyer says he'll sign the contract if we give him certain concessions. I went to the general manager of my company. I had to get special permission to give those concessions. I then went with my sales rep. We went into the buyer's office and we said, okay, you've asked us for these concessions and here we're giving them to you. So now would you please sign the contract? Well, the customer says, just a minute, he says, before I sign the contract, I want this and I want that and I want... Well, wait a minute, you never said anything about that. Here I had gone out on a limb for this guy. And now he was shafting me. Now I was going to look bad. I mean, first of all, I was going to look bad, to my boss. My credibility would be shot, and who knows what else he was going to ask for. So you know what I did? I didn't say a word. I had a bunch of stuff laid out on the table there. I had a calculator and papers and the contract. I started picking everything up and put it in my briefcase, and I got up and started to walk out. And the customer looks at me. He says, Ed, what are you doing? I said, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm walking out. He says, what do you mean you're walking out? I said, you lied to us and I don't want to do business with you. And he's looking at me in shock. No one had ever done this to him before, I'm sure. My poor sales rep is looking at me like, there goes my commission. And I leave, I walk out. Well, we're in one of these big New York City high-rise office buildings. I get to the elevator and guess who comes charging down the hallway? The customer. He says, wait, Ed, wait, I'll sign the contract. I'll sign. So we go back into his office. He signs the contract. It takes us about an hour to get everything signed and copies made. And once it's all done, he says to me, Ed, now that we've consummated the agreement, he said, let me ask you something. If I hadn't followed you all the way out to the elevator, would you have come back? And I looked at him with a little twinkle in my eye and I said, you'll never know. And the fact is, I didn't even know the answer to that question myself until I thought about it. And I realized I had stumbled upon something very, very important, which is that you have to be willing to walk out. Now, mind you, I'm saying be willing to walk out. I'm not saying that you should walk out. Because what happens is, in so many negotiations, we are desperate. You're desperate. You need a car to get to work. You have to buy a car. You need a job. You have to accept. We feel that we have to make the deal. As soon as you do that, the other side is going to know that. They are going to sense it. They can feel it just the way an animal can feel that another animal is afraid. But when you say to yourself, hey, if I can't get the deal that I want, I'm going to take off. I'm going to walk out of here. You don't have to say a word. They get it. They understand. And they know that they're going to have to work harder in order to make the deal. As I get older and I learn more about negotiation, I am convinced more and more that this is the whole crux of the baby right there, is your willingness to walk away. Because most people, I guarantee you, don't have that kind of guts. Most people are afraid to even think about walking out. But if you go into a negotiation and you don't have alternatives, if you don't have plan B, then you're not prepared. You might as well just give in. But as soon as you say to yourself, if I can't get the terms and the deal and the things that I need in this negotiation, I am out of here, it changes the whole complexion of the negotiation. Okay, let's summarize the 6 most important principles of negotiation. Number 1, aim high. Number 2, do your homework. Number 3, be a good listener. Number 4, be patient. Number 5, always get something in return. And number 6, always be willing to walk away. If you follow these 6 principles, you will be a great negotiator. Good luck.